No one in the city of Ravenport, Illinois, had ever seen Vincenzo De Luca afraid. They had seen him furious. They had seen him merciless. They had seen grown men beg when his shadow crossed a room. But fear? Never. That's why the silence in the underground parking garage felt wrong. Too clean. Too quiet. The bullet came from the left. Close range, professional, unforgiving. It punched through Vincenzo's chest just beneath the collarbone, tearing flesh, bone, and certainty apart in a single violent second. He didn't scream. He didn't even fall right away. His hand tightened against the cold metal of his car door, as if his body refused to accept what had just happened. Then his knees buckled, blood soaked into his white dress shirt, blooming outward like a dark confession. His men reacted too late. Guns drawn, shouts echoing, chaos exploding into the concrete space. But the shooter was already gone, planned, precise, confident that the king of Ravenport's underworld would bleed out where he stood. Vincenzo De Luca was not supposed to die in a parking garage. He was supposed to die old, untouchable, surrounded by enemies too afraid to strike, and allies too dependent to betray him. But fate has a way of laughing at power. By the time his men forced him into a blacked-out ambulance, Vincenzo's breathing was shallow, his vision blurred, sound stretched and warped. Somewhere between consciousness and darkness, he realized something that terrified him more than the bullet. He couldn't feel his left arm. At St. Catherine's Medical Center, the ER shut down. Not officially, but effectively. Doctors moved fast, their professionalism sharpened by the silent pressure of the men in tailored suits lining the walls. No one asked who Vincenzo De Luca was. They didn't need to. Hospitals learned quickly which patients came with consequences. Hours passed. Blood transfusions, emergency surgery, mechanical ventilation, and still his body failed him. At 2:41 a.m., the lead trauma surgeon stepped out of the operating room and removed her gloves slowly. Her eyes were tired, not defeated, experienced. "He's alive," she said carefully, "but barely. Severe internal damage, oxygen deprivation, massive trauma to the nervous system." Someone asked a question no one wanted to hear the answer to. "Will he wake up?" The doctor hesitated, then shook her head. "If he does, he won't be the same." Vincenzo De Luca was transferred to a private ICU room, surrounded by machines that breathe for him, monitor for him, live for him. The man who once controlled entire city blocks with a phone call now depended on electricity and plastic tubes to remain in the world. And by dawn, even that might stop. Outside the ICU door stood Marco De Luca, Vincenzo's younger brother. Marco was different. Where Vincenzo ruled through fear and instinct, Marco ruled through calculation. He wore no jewelry, no unnecessary expression. He believed emotion was a liability, and tonight he proved it. The neurologist explained the scans. Minimal brain activity, severe trauma, no signs of improvement. Legally, the doctor said, you can withdraw life support if there's no change within the next several hours. Marco nodded once. He didn't ask for privacy, didn't ask for time, didn't argue. He signed the authorization form with a steady hand. At 6 a.m., the machines would be turned off. Vincenzo De Luca, feared, hunted, worshipped, would be pronounced dead. Word spread quietly through the criminal veins of Ravenport. Deals paused. Enemies waited. Allies sharpened knives behind smiles. A vacuum was forming, and everyone felt it. No one noticed the woman mopping the floor outside the ICU. Her name was Marisol Reed, 27 years old, night shift hospital cleaner, single mother. Marisol existed in a world that powerful men never saw. She wore second-hand scrubs over worn sneakers and moved through hallways like a ghost. Her job was to erase evidence, blood, spills, traces of life and death, so others didn't have to think about them. She had been working since 9 p.m. Already 12 hours deep into a shift, she couldn't afford to leave early. Her body ached, her head throbbed, and her heart was somewhere else entirely. with her daughter, Nora, age 2, small, frequently sick, born with weak lungs and a strength that didn't match her size. Marisol cleaned near the ICU every night, but something about this room stopped her. The guards outside the door never spoke. The energy was heavy, like the air was waiting for permission to move. During her break, Marisol did something she wasn't supposed to do. She slipped inside. The room was dim. Machines hummed steadily. Vincenzo De Luca lay motionless, his face pale, his body unnaturally still. He looked less like a monster, and more like a man who had run out of time. Marisol stood there longer than she meant to. She didn't know why she spoke, but she did. "I don't know who you are," she whispered, voice barely audible. "But if you can hear me, you're not alone." She told him about Nora, about hospital bills, about working nights, so her daughter could sleep safely somewhere warm, about being scared all the time. She didn't ask for miracles. She just talked. That night, Marisol came back. And the next, every night until the morning the machines were supposed to go quiet. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Vincenzo De Luca's brain activity spiked briefly during those visits. Not enough to trigger alarms. Not enough to change decisions. But enough to suggest something inside him hadn't let go. By the final night, everything was ready. Paperwork signed. Doctors resigned. Marco prepared. Marisol arrived late, panic in her chest. Nora's babysitter had canceled. Her daughter's fever was climbing. She had nowhere to go, so she made a decision that would change everything. She brought her child with her. Wrapped in a thin blanket, Nora slept against Marisol's shoulder as she slipped into the ICU room one last time. Tears burned behind Marisol's eyes. She sat beside the bed, trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the unconscious man. "This is probably goodbye." Nora stirred, coughed. Marisol panicked. Desperate and exhausted, she laid her daughter gently on Vincenzo's chest, just for warmth, just until the coughing stopped. Nora's tiny hand curled into the fabric of his hospital gown. And then the heart monitor stuttered. Once, then again. Marisol froze. The line jumped. And somewhere deep inside a man who was supposed to die at sunrise, something moved. The heart monitor wasn't supposed to do that. At first, it was only a stutter. So brief Marisol Reed thought she imagined it. Her eyes snapped to the screen, then back to the man beneath her daughter. Vincenzo De Luca remained still, his face expressionless, chest unmoving beneath layers of gauze and plastic tubing. The machine beeped again. A weak rhythm, irregular, but unmistakably alive. Marisol's breath caught in her throat. She didn't scream. She didn't move. Years of surviving quietly had trained her body to freeze when something felt dangerous or unreal. Her hand hovered over Nora's back, afraid that lifting her daughter away might undo whatever fragile thing was happening. The monitor beeped again, louder this time. A nurse burst through the door, eyes sharp, instincts already firing. She stared at the screen, then at Vincenzo, then at the child lying on his chest. What the hell? She hit the emergency button. Within seconds, the room filled. Doctors rushed in, voices overlapping, disbelief cutting through their professionalism. Someone lifted Nora gently away. Another adjusted the ventilator. The neurologist leaned over Vincenzo's face, checking pupils' pulse, reflexes. Heart rate stabilizing, someone said. Blood pressure's climbing. That's not possible. He'd been unresponsive for days. Marisol was pushed gently but firmly toward the wall. Nora clutched tightly in her arms now, confusion and fear written across her child's flushed face. She didn't understand the words being shouted, only the tone. Shock, urgency, something close to fear. The machines no longer sounded like they were waiting. They sounded like they were working. By the time Marco De Luca arrived, the room was locked down. He had been halfway out of the hospital. Papers already signed. Phone already vibrating with messages from men eager to discuss next steps. He returned because instinct told him something was wrong. Instinct rarely lied. A doctor met him outside the ICU, face pale. "We're seeing improvement," she said carefully. "Vital signs are responding. Brain activity has increased." Marco stared at her. "That's not what you said 6 hours ago." "No," she admitted. "It isn't." Marco glanced through the glass. His brother lay exactly where he had left him, alive. And suddenly, the future Marco had already begun calculating shattered into 1,000 unstable possibilities. News like that doesn't stay contained. By noon, whispers rippled through Ravenport's underworld. Rivals who had already begun mobilizing paused. Allies who had started choosing sides hesitated. If Vincenzo De Luca survived, even damaged, everything changed, or got worse. Vincenzo didn't wake up right away. For 2 days, he drifted in and out of shallow consciousness. His body fought like it always had, stubborn, resistant, refusing to surrender quietly. Doctors stopped using the word miracle and replaced it with unexplained improvement. But unexplained didn't mean welcomed, because miracles make people nervous, especially dangerous people. Marisol wasn't allowed back in the ICU. Security escorted her out after the incident, warning her she was under investigation for violating hospital policy. Bringing a child into a restricted medical area wasn't just grounds for termination, it was grounds for legal trouble. She didn't argue. She couldn't afford to. She went back to work scrubbing floors with shaking hands, pretending her world hadn't almost collided with something far bigger than her. But she felt it now, eyes on her that hadn't been there before. Men she didn't recognize. Suits that didn't belong in a hospital. Silence that followed her down hallways. Someone had noticed her. On the 3rd night after the incident, Vincenzo De Luca opened his eyes. The room was dim, lit only by machine lights and the city glow bleeding through the window. Pain registered first, then confusion, then memory, sharp and sudden. The garage, the gunshot, darkness. His breathing hitched. A nurse noticed immediately. Doctors rushed in again, this time with a different energy, not panic, but awe. Vincenzo tried to speak. Failed. His throat burned, but his eyes moved. Focused. Aware. "Mr. De Luca," the doctor said slowly, as if afraid to scare him back into unconsciousness. "You're in St. Catherine's Medical Center. You were injured. You've been unconscious for several days." Several days. Vincenzo's gaze drifted to the monitor, then, unexpectedly, to the corner of the room. Empty. His brow furrowed. He felt it then, not logically, not medically, but emotionally. Something was missing. A warmth, a weight, a presence. When Marco entered the room hours later, Vincenzo was awake enough to recognize him. His brother's face remained neutral, but his eyes searched for damage, mental, emotional, permanent. "You scared the hell out of the city?" Marco said quietly. Vincenzo managed a faint smirk. "Good," he rasped. But when Marco explained what had happened, about the cleaner, about the child, about the moment the machines changed, Vincenzo went still. A long silence filled the room. "A woman," Vincenzo finally whispered. "And a child." Marco nodded. "That's what they say." Vincenzo closed his eyes. In his fractured memory, something surfaced. A small hand, warm, gripping fabric. He didn't understand it, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Find her. While Vincenzo recovered, the city tested him. Old enemies probed his defenses. Former allies whispered about weakness. A man who almost died was a man who could die again. And then someone made a mistake. Marisol Reed received a call. No caller ID. No warning. A calm male voice spoke. "You were in his room." The voice said, "With the child." Marisol's blood ran cold. "Yes," she whispered. "Be careful," the voice replied. "Not everyone believes in miracles." The line went dead. That night, Marisol slept with the lights on, Nora curled against her chest, heart racing with a fear she couldn't name. Across the city, Vincenzo De Luca stared out of his hospital window, realization settling into something heavier than gratitude. Saving him had consequences, and whoever threatened that woman had just crossed the wrong line. Vincenzo De Luca learned the truth slowly, not because it was hidden, but because his body wouldn't allow him to absorb it all at once. Recovery came in fragments. Flashes of clarity followed by crushing exhaustion, moments of strength swallowed by waves of pain. But his mind, even fractured, was still dangerous. And it was working. The moment he was strong enough to sit up, Vincenzo ordered silence. No visitors. No associates. No celebrations. The city buzzed with rumors, but the man at the center of them lay still, listening. Marco noticed the change immediately. Vincenzo no longer asked about territory, no longer asked who was loyal, no longer asked who had moved too fast while he was unconscious. Instead, he asked about Marisol Reed. Where does she live? Vincenzo asked one night, voice hoarse but steady. Marco hesitated. She's a cleaner, single mother, lives on the west side, near the old rail yards. And the call she received? Vincenzo pressed. Marco's jaw tightened. Someone tested her. I don't know who yet. Vincenzo closed his eyes. In the old days, that would have been enough. Someone threatened something that belonged, however loosely, to him. The response would have been swift and absolute. But this time was different. Because Marisol didn't belong to him. She was collateral in a world she never chose. That made the threat worse. Vincenzo requested files, financial, legal, medical. Quietly, unofficially, what came back painted a picture he hadn't expected to feel. Marisol worked 2 jobs before the hospital. Her ex-husband had a record, domestic violence, intimidation, unpaid child support. Her daughter, Nora, had chronic respiratory issues and mounting medical bills. Marisol wasn't weak. She was drowning. And drowning people didn't need to be saved loudly. They needed the water to stop rising. Meanwhile, Ravenport's underworld grew restless. Vincenzo's absence had created cracks. Crews that once answered without question began circling each other. Old grudges resurfaced. One faction, led by Anthony Cade, moved openly, too openly. Cade always smiled too much around Vincenzo. That alone made him dangerous. Marco confronted Vincenzo with the reports. Cade's pushing shipments through the docks without clearance, Marco said. He's testing us. Vincenzo nodded slowly. Let him. Marco stared. Let him? Let him think I'm weak. That answer scared Marco more than anger ever had, because weakness was never Vincenzo's move. 2 nights later, Marisol noticed a car. It had been parked across the street since dusk. Engine off, windows dark, no plate she could see. Fear crawled up her spine. She packed a bag that night, just in case. Before she could leave, there was a knock, 3 sharp taps. Marisol froze, Nora already crying softly behind her. She opened the door a fraction. 2 men stood there, not threatening, not smiling, professional. We're here to help, one said calmly. Marisol slammed the door. It didn't matter. The locks disengaged anyway. They didn't hurt her, didn't raise their voices. One of them knelt to Nora's level, speaking gently. No one is here to hurt you. Marisol was shaking too hard to respond. You're coming with us, the man said. Somewhere safe. At the hospital, Vincenzo felt it before Marco spoke. She's gone, Marco said quietly, but not taken by enemies. By us. Vincenzo's eyes snapped open. You touched her to protect her. Vincenzo's voice dropped. You don't protect someone by terrifying them. Marco didn't argue, because deep down he knew it was true. Marisol and Nora were relocated to a secure apartment overnight. Bills were paid. Legal documents quietly erased. Her ex-husband vanished from her life. Restraining orders enforced with a weight no court had ever given her before. But Marisol didn't feel saved. She felt owned. And that scared her more than poverty ever had. When Vincenzo finally met her again, it wasn't dramatic. No guards. No intimidation. Just a man still healing, sitting across from her in a quiet hospital room. I didn't ask for this, Marisol said, voice trembling. Any of it. I know, Vincenzo replied. Silence stretched between them. "You saved my life," he continued. "And I don't know why." Marisol swallowed. "I didn't save you. I was just talking, trying to survive." Vincenzo studied her. All his life, people had looked at him with fear or desire. Marisol looked at him with neither, only exhaustion and resolve. That night, Vincenzo made a decision that would cost him power, blood, and loyalty. He would change things, not slowly, but permanently. Marco argued. The crews resisted. Cade laughed, until his warehouses burned without a single casualty. A message without bodies. For the first time, Vincenzo used fear to end fear. He redirected money, shut down routes, sold off assets, turned crime into leverage for something else, something cleaner. Enemies grew desperate, and then Cade made his final move. A bomb detonated outside a community clinic funded quietly by Vincenzo's money. No deaths, but a message. War. Vincenzo stood at the hospital window, fists clenched, rage boiling beneath calm. Mercy had been answered with fire. He turned to Marco. "Bring everyone," Vincenzo said coldly, "but not for revenge." Marco frowned. "For an ending." The meeting took place before dawn. No penthouse, no chandeliers, no ceremony, just an abandoned steel processing plant on the outskirts of Ravenport, its windows boarded, its floor stained by decades of industrial neglect. It was neutral ground, chosen not for safety, but for honesty. No one came here to pretend. They came because the old world was ending. Vincenzo De Luca arrived last, not because he wanted to make an entrance, but because he wanted to watch who stayed until the end. Men filled the space in small clusters. Some had been with him since the beginning. Others had switched loyalties twice in 1 year. A few stood alone, already calculating escape routes. Marco stood at Vincenzo's side, jaw tight. Anthony Cade leaned against a rusted column, hands in his pockets. Smiling like this was all a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with the right numbers. Vincenzo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This ends tonight," he said. The room stilled. No more territory fights. No more retaliation. No more pretending this doesn't destroy everything it touches. Cade laughed softly. "You don't just walk away from an empire." Vincenzo looked at him. "I'm not walking away," he said. "I'm dismantling it." The words landed heavier than gunfire. Some men protested. Others whispered. One reached instinctively for his weapon and thought better of it. Vincenzo continued. "All operations shut down within 60 days. Assets liquidated. Routes sold to legitimate buyers. Anyone who refuses is free to leave now." Silence. Then movement. One man walked out. Then another. Then several more. Each step echoed like a verdict. Anthony Cade didn't move. "You're weak now," Cade said. "That's the truth no one wants to say." Vincenzo nodded. Yes. That was the moment the room understood. Weakness wasn't his fear. It was his choice. Cade lunged. The shot came from behind him. Clean, final. Marco lowered the gun slowly. No one else. Marco asked. No one answered. By sunrise, the underworld of Ravenport had lost its spine. There was no war, no chaos, just collapse. The dismantling wasn't clean. It never is. Some men vanished. Some turned state's evidence. Others tried to pull Vincenzo back into the shadows with promises of control and safety. He refused all of it. Instead, he signed documents, sold properties, closed accounts, redirected money. Millions moved quietly into places no criminal ever bragged about. Clinics, shelters, legal aid funds. The city noticed slowly. Then all at once, a nonprofit appeared on paper with no announcement. The North Star Initiative. It provided overnight child care for hospital workers, emergency housing for women escaping abuse, medical grants for families drowning in bills no insurance would touch, no press releases, no naming ceremonies, just doors opening where there had been none. Marisol Reed didn't trust it at first. She sat across from Vincenzo in a bare office space, hands folded tightly in her lap. Nora playing quietly on the floor. "You don't get to fix everything," Marisol said. "Not with money." "I know," Vincenzo replied. "That's why I'm not asking you to forgive me." She studied him. "You're asking me to help." "Yes." Marisol laughed once, bitter and tired. "You ruin lives." "So, did the system that broke you," Vincenzo said gently. "I can't erase the past, but I can fund the future. I need someone who knows what's actually broken." Marisol looked down at her daughter, at the quiet confidence Nora had developed since the fear left their nights. "I'm not your redemption," Marisol said. "I know," Vincenzo answered. "You're the safeguard." She accepted, not because she trusted him, but because she trusted herself. Vincenzo disappeared from public life. No interviews, no sightings, no legends. The city whispered, but eventually it moved on. It always did. Marisol didn't. She worked until exhaustion became normal again, but this time the work mattered. Policies changed. Lives stabilized. Women who once whispered their stories now spoke them aloud. And Nora? Nora grew strong. Her lungs improved. Her laughter filled rooms that once felt hollow. She called Vincenzo Vince. Not father, not savior, just Vince. And that was enough. On a quiet evening 2 years later, Vincenzo stood on a balcony overlooking Raventport's lights. No guards, no weapons, just wind and memory. Marisol joined him. "You don't miss it?" she asked. Vincenzo shook his head. "Power is loud. Peace is quiet. I didn't know the difference." She nodded. Below them, the city breathed, unaware how close it had come to breaking forever. Vincenzo knelt beside Nora, who was drawing with chalk on the concrete. "What are you making?" he asked. "A star," she said. He smiled. Once, the world had feared him. Now, it didn't even notice him. And for the first time in his life, Vincenzo De Luca was exactly where he belonged.